Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
Week 1 is here. We're less than 24 hours away from the NFL season starting.
We are. It feels like it's been a lifetime and no time at all at the same time, but we did finally make it. There was a lot of waiting. It was a little touch and go whether or not we'd make it all the way here, but was it 244 days later? Football is almost back.
You know the exact number of days?
I mean, there are little marks on my wall.
Do you have it like counting down? Do you have
I got tally marks like I'm in prison. I got one for every day we've been waiting.
Doomsday clock ticking or whatever, counting down the days.
Is it Escape from Alcatraz that Clint Eastwood has the ticks on his wall for every single day he's been there at Alcatraz? Is that what it is?
He might do it at Escape from. I haven't seen Escape from Alcatraz.
I've only seen bits and pieces, but anyway, yes, wall full of tally marks, 244, I think, give or take a few to be precise. But folks, we are almost back to Packers football in general. We are recording this Wednesday night, so just in case any more information comes out injury report wise or other tomorrow, just keep that in mind. But Dad, Friday, 7:15 p.m. Lambeau time. Packers playing the Eagles in Brazil. They just landed like an hour ago, based on what I just saw.
Right, we saw that they're actually there. They were, I think it's a video of them walking through the locker room.
Either the locker room or the airport. I honestly couldn't tell. But so they are there. The Eagles also landed like shortly after them. So it's going to be exciting. The first game ever played in South America, which is also very exciting. The Packers are able to be a part of that. But Dad, we should probably just get right into this because we have a lot to talk about. But before we do, I just want to pitch a couple of things. If you like what you hear, I'm going to do this really quick because we do have a lot to talk about for this game. If you but
you have time for that little aside.
I do. I'm going to make up for it with the double time. If you like what you hear here today, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out whenever we have new episodes out. Stats that we find. We're doing research for these episodes. Piece of content from other Packers content creators that we like. Roster updates, injury updates, etc., etc. One-stop shop and everything Titletown. And then please subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Apple, Google, Spotify. We are working on figuring out the YouTube. Our distributor has recently stopped distributing to YouTube, so we're trying to figure out how we can get around that. But so just keep in mind, we're bear with us. We're trying to work on that. But anyway, Dad, let's get right to it. Before we start talking about this game specifically, though, we do just have a couple of news and notes since the last time we talked was just a quick instant react to the 53-man roster. Since then, we mentioned at the time that Greg Joseph was the kicker for now. And then less than 24 hours later, the Packers released Greg Joseph and signed kicker Braden Narvison to be the starting kicker. He is an undrafted free agent rookie out of NC State and then a few other colleges before that, but he left NC State, was his last school he was at. He was with the Titans in camp prior to coming over to the Packers. He was 6 of 7 in the preseason, including a make from 59 yards and his only miss being from 58 yards. So new kicker in Green Bay. And then they have also finalized their practice squad since we last spoke. I'm just going to read them off really quick. Defensive lineman Deslin Alexander, fullback Andrew Beck, running back Chris Brooks, safety Omar Brown, quarterback Sean Clifford, defensive lineman James Esther, cornerback Kamal Haddon, wide receiver Julian Hicks, offensive lineman Donovan Jennings, cornerback Kalen King, running back Ellis Merriweather, running back LaMichael Pirine, cornerback Robert Rochelle, linebacker Chris Russell, offensive lineman Lessida Smith, wide receiver Jalen Wayne, and then kicker Alex Hale as their International Pathway Program player. So new kicker, practice squad set. Dad, anything you want to just touch on really quick there, or should we just move on to talking about this game?
And they're just say with the players that we wanted to get back, some of them, and some of them that they added late. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, some players that the Packers, we talked about in the last 53 is like, oh, players never get claimed. Packers had 3 players claimed, with Anthony Johnson Jr. going to the Giants, Royce Newman going to the Buccaneers.
Yeah. More than 10% of all the claims came from the Packers.
Yeah,
like
that's
26
very
league
annoying.
wide or something like that.
And who was the third one? Remind me. It was Anthony Johnson Jr., Royce Newman, and the third one was...
Grant DuBose.
Grant DuBose to Miami, yeah. And then also Christian Welch ended up signing with the Broncos a little bit later, but also to their 53. So the Packers could not get him back either. And then, Michael Pratt went to the Buccaneers, a couple other players here or there. But so, yeah, unfortunate 10% of the claims were from the Packers, but just goes to show Packers' depth of roster was pretty good this year. So keep that in mind. It's a hidden silver lining there. But anyway, Dad, anything else you want to tack on there, or should we start talking about this game?
Let's start talking about the game and the injury report and whether we'll be calling up any of the players from that practice squad.
Yeah. So for the injury report, like you were saying, we don't have official designations yet. We won't get those until tomorrow. But we do have, some a little bit of an insight into how the practice reports have gone so far. Now, the Wednesday practice reports, given that they were flying all day, are just estimations. But our latest estimations of the practice reports for the Packers were Edgerrin Cooper limited participation with a hip injury, Romeo Doubs limited both days, and also Cooper both days, limited with a hand injury for Romeo Doubs. Tucker Kraft was not listed on Tuesday, but then added to the injury report with a back injury on Wednesday, so that's something to keep an eye on.
The kind of injury you could get from a flight, except it was before the flight.
I was going to say, except they updated before the flight. So, and then Marshawn Lloyd with that hamstring injury didn't participate Tuesday, but was estimated as a limited participant Wednesday. Obviously, just an estimation, so who actually knows?
Yeah.
Carrington Valentine with a hamstring was limited both days, and then Emmanuel Wilson with a hip was limited both days as well. Then
I just wanted to add one thing about Lloyd. LaFleur said that was basically sort of the schedule, the plan for him to take that Wednesday off after getting 2 days of practice before that.
Taking that Tuesday off, but having that day off. Yeah, so it kind of makes sense, they're being extra cautious with those hamstring injuries this year. And obviously they got a couple players dealing with them already. So for the Packers, I think the main things that I'm keeping my eye on are that Kraft one. And then with both Lloyd and Wilson limited, what happens at running back, specifically running back 2? I think we were talking about this off air, but we probably expect that Merriweather would be the one that would be elevated to be that running back 2 if both of them were limited or couldn't go, just given the fact that he was the only one there in camp. They do have, like we said, LaMichael Pirine and Chris Brooks there, but I think they've probably been there less than a week now, right? So it'd be a tough sledding for them to contribute right away, right?
Yeah, they probably don't know the playbook or the protections or,
or the other players' names or the coaches' names or any of the other things.
This is a story. Was it players getting introduced to the quarterback in the huddle?
That was a Joe Thomas story where he didn't know the quarterback. He's like, by the way, I'm Joe. I'm your left tackle today. But no, and then onto the Eagles side of the injury report. The only player really listed is Devin White, who's actually out for this game, is not even making the trip to Brazil. Their linebacker that they brought in free agency this year, starting linebacker, so that's definitely a big blow for them. And then Isaiah Rodgers, one of their corners with a hand injury, was limited both Tuesday and Wednesday. No Devin White for the Eagles. That probably means Nakobe Dean is going to start, but he is pretty small. He's just 5'11 and a quarter and 231 pounds, so perhaps that lends itself to the Packers maybe having a bit of an advantage on the ground, maybe.
Maybe. Though I was looking through Eagles Twitter a little bit, and I think people were saying that Dean was ahead of White
anyway
in sort of the linebacker pecking order.
Okay. So I think Devin White is more of a name at this point than an actual standout player, given the fact he was a top 5 pick.
He's definitely one of the starters. In 2 linebacker sets, it seems like it was going to be the 2 of them. From what I could tell. But Dean, if it's only one linebacker on the field, it may be that it was going to be Dean had moved ahead of him already.
Yeah, I was looking at some depth charts that had Zach Bond ahead of Devin White, but obviously all these depth charts online are estimations, so hard to know. But yeah, so that's it for the injury report. Dad, anything else you wanted to touch on there, or should we move on to just our game preview?
Let's go into the preview.
Okay, well, take it away.
Right, so the game, as most of you should know by now, is in South America, in São Paulo, Brazil, on Friday at 7:15 Green Bay time. It'll be the second game of the NFL season.
Mm-hmm. So kick off tomorrow. It's Friday night football on Friday.
Very, very rare Friday night football game.
I think they can only do that because it's not in the States, by the way. I think there are TV broadcasting rules about high school gets Friday, college gets Saturday, and then the NFL gets Sunday.
And so, not subject to those
not our laws.
US rules.
Yep, exactly.
And the Eagles are favored by 2.5 points with an over-under of 48.5 for an implied score ish of 25-23, seeing as half and quarter points aren't possible.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So general betting.
That's one.
Fair enough. you got me there. General betting feeling is you get 3 points for being at home. So
I've been wondering. Yes.
So would they have been 5.5 point favorites if this game had been in Philly?
Or did the algorithm just call us a home game?
No. They have. There's too much money on the line for them to be doing all that. But so that just makes me think they would be 5.5, almost a touchdown favorite if this game had been in Philly.
Sounds
which feels
so wrong.
Doesn't feel right to me. But I mean, it is what it is. I guess that's just something that kind of stood out to me. I was a little bit surprised by that.
I don't see how that could be. When the Packers were looking so much better than the Eagles for the last 8 games of the year last year.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll see. I guess we will see.
Maybe there's a fair amount of betting sentiment that doesn't believe in the Packers yet. I hope they all.
I hope they're all wrong. But anyway, so that's kind of the quick hits on the game. Dad, do you want to give us a little bit of an update though on what's been going on with the Eagles? Given it's going into week 1, a lot of people don't keep track of the offseason as much as we do. What's new with the Eagles? Who's left? Who's coming in? How do they look at the end of last year, et cetera, et cetera? How are they looking for this year? Take it away.
So what I alluded to is last year the Eagles were like the best team in the league the first beginning of the season. They started off 10-1. Their low loss was to the Jets, which was maybe the Jets' only win. I can't remember at that part of the year. But then they finished losing 6 of their last 7 games, including the 32-9 loss to Tampa Bay in the wild card.
Was it really 32-9?
32-9.
Oh my goodness, that's a stomping.
Yeah, it was ugly. Let's of course have that wrong.
Someone would have fact-checked you eventually.
You think we'll get that? Somebody will come back like, we don't even... Somebody will figure that out.
So where the heck did you get 32-9 from?
No, that's 32-9.
That's crazy. That's a tough blow up. But Dad, they've made a lot of changes since then. Some of them, positive changes, some of them negative changes, but they got a lot of players coming in and out. I can run through the list really quick just because I got them all written down here.
Yeah, if you want to go through the player list. I was going to mention the coaching staff changes.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say there's a lot of new faces and new places. I'm just going to run through them really quick. Pieces that are leaving. Coaching, like you mentioned, coaches offensive coordinator Brian Johnson and defensive coordinator Matt Patricia and also defensive coordinator Sean Desai are all out. Jason Kelsey, Hall of Fame center and, arguably their best player on offense, out, retired. Fletcher Cox, defensive interior lineman who'd been there forever, retired as well. Hassan Reddick traded to the Jets, who was, probably their best edge rusher last year. Kevin Byard, one of their starting safeties.
Maybe they saw a ticking time bomb.
Yeah, well, I blame the Jets, honestly, more than I blame Hassan Reddick.
It's very on brand for the Jets right now to trade for him and not have a deal in place.
Yeah, and then Kevin Byard, starting safety, out as well. He's with the Bears now. And then Shaq Leonard, their starting linebacker for the second half of the year after they acquired him, is also gone. But they did bring a lot of new people in. Like we mentioned, two major coaching staff moves out, but they brought in offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, who had previously been with the Chargers and Cowboys, and then defensive coordinator Vic Fangio, who has been around the league a very long time and is very well regarded. Also brought in, obviously, Saquon Barkley. I'm sure for those of you who play fantasy know that by now, but star running back who had previously been with the Giants. Brought in edge rusher Bryce Huff, who had been more of a pass down, pass rush specialist for the Jets, but has really good underlying numbers, kind of similar to when the Packers brought in Zadarius Smith a few years ago, is what they're hoping for there, that he can transition to a bigger role.
Not.
Yeah, let's hope not. Brought in CJ Gardner-Johnson, who, had been with them before and then had gone to the Lions, is now back with the Eagles, familiar face. Brought in Devin White, who we mentioned is not going to play in this game. Traded for Jahan Dotson to be their wide receiver 3, had previously been with the Commanders. And then with their top draft picks, took a couple of defensive backs in Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, who a lot of people were quite high on. But Dad, so those are those new faces and new places. And
I would just mention one other kind of new face who wasn't added this offseason is Isaiah Rodgers.
Yep.
Who didn't play for them last year, but will this year after having to sit out. This is the first time that he'll be able to play for them since they signed him because he had to sit out a year.
Yeah, he had to sit out a year for a gambling suspension, but so now he is back. We'll see if he's, has any rust. And they also got a lot of new extensions done for players this offseason. A.J. Brown signed a new extension this offseason. Devontae Smith signed a new extension this offseason. Landon Dickerson, one of their guards, signed a new extension. Jake Elliott, their kicker, signed a new extension. And Jordan Mailata, their left tackle. All the 5 of them signed big money new extensions. And Dad, I think one of the big stories around the Eagles this year is that there's a lot of pressure on their head coach, Nick Sirianni, right?
Oh, yeah. Which is why I think he hired 2 new coordinators.
Well,
offense
he didn't,
and defense, because
he didn't. Well, here's the thing: he didn't hire them. They went over his head. The front office actually hired them.
This is why the team hired them.
Yes, Howie Roseman essentially said,
"Hot seat, hot."
And it is for those of you who don't know, it is very unusual for a head coach not to be able to hire their own coordinators. But in this instance, the GM essentially said, "You're coaching with these guys. You are getting Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio because I'm making that decision. I'm taking it out of your hands because it went so poorly last year." Which is, if that doesn't send red alarm bells that my goodness, my job is in danger. And
that also says you might not make it through this year.
And
kind of hot seat.
Exactly, because either one of those guys could be primed to just step into a head coaching role. We've seen Vic Fangio be a head coach before. It didn't go amazingly, but he's at least able to run a room and be an interim. And then also add on to the fact that there's an article published this offseason, I can't remember where, I forgot to write that down, apologies, where essentially the crux of the article, the main point brought up was that the relationship between Nick Sirianni and quarterback Jalen Hurts had soured so much to the point where they couldn't even be on one-on-one meetings anymore because it was just too awkward between them.
Yeah,
they had to have
somebody from HR sitting in the room.
They had to have another coach in the room if they were to meet at all, was what this article was saying. Which, I mean, that's what I'm saying is the pressure on Nick Sirianni, the head coach of the Eagles this year, is very, very high, like at an all-time level, to the point where I think I've heard a bunch of people say this, but it's like I would be just as surprised if he is fired by November as if they made the Super Bowl. Like the range of outcomes for this team is very wide, especially the range of outcomes for Nick Sirianni. But Dad,
I would be more surprised if they make the Super Bowl than if he's fired by November.
Yeah, fair enough. But anyway, so that's kind of what's been going on with, some roster moves and their coaching stuff. But how is this team looking on the field coming into this year, though, Dad?
Right. So we could talk a little bit how they did last year. So last year they were 7th in points per drive on offense and in the league, and 7th in the league in yards per drive on offense. Now compare that to Green Bay was 6th in points per drive and 9th in yards per drive last year on offense. So the offense was pretty good last year, all summed up over the year. However, they were 30th, as in they gave up the third most points allowed per drive. And they were 29th in yards allowed per drive on defense. Compare that, that's worse than Green Bay's 25th and 26th, which we were unhappy with.
Yeah. And that got, our defensive coordinator fired. That's probably part of the reason their defensive coordinator got not fired. It was a big thing where they brought in Matt Patricia as the defensive play caller, but don't worry, he's not the defensive coordinator. Sean Desai is still the defensive coordinator, but Sean Desai is just going to sit up in the box and do nothing. So, is he even, what's the point? But yeah, so their defense was a cluster last year, fair to say.
And not a cluster, not a cluster of success. This is not a garland you would want to wear. So that was what they did last year. Of course, they've had a lot of player turnover. So I wanted to get, since we're in the beginning of the year, we don't have, the usual numbers we use to compare teams in their efficiency or production metrics. So to try to get an estimate of what they would do this year, I did a similar thing to what I had done for the entire NFC North, which is to use the predicted depth charts from the team sites and the PF grades for all of those players for last year, and the projected snap counts for all of those players based on snap counts from last year for players in that same slot. So the starting edge rushers would have the same snap count as last year, even though, for example, for the Eagles, their starting edge rushers are not the same as last year. Essentially, you just, edge 1 and 2 take edge 1 and 2 snap share, cornerback 1 and 2, et cetera. So then I get a weighted average of PF grades for each position group. And so I did that for, offensive line, running backs, quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends on offense, interior defensive line, so defensive tackles, edge rushers, off-ball linebackers, corners, and safeties. So trying to not confound, 4-3 versus 3-4. So doing all that for the Eagles and the Packers. So this changed a little bit from what I did before because the Packers have a slightly different depth chart now after we've gone through the training camp of the preseason. The Eagles defense has a slightly better weighted average compared to Green Bay so the Eagles defense 67.1, Green Bay's defense is 65.3. So that's average across all of the position groups. And that is mostly because the Eagles have a substantial advantage over Green Bay for the defensive tackle position group, despite losing Fletcher Cox. And as well as they have a decent advantage at corner and a slight advantage at edge rusher, though that's pretty close. While Green Bay has a substantial advantage at safety and a small advantage at linebacker. So part of this corner group advantage for the Eagles is that, Jair, for example, had what we think is a subpar year for him. We expect him to do much better. So this is just, I only took last year's numbers. I didn't do a rolling 3-year average or anything like that. So that gives the Eagles a slight advantage on defense, and on offense, they also have a even smaller advantage. They have a huge advantage on the offensive line, despite the retirement of Jason Kelce. That's where it's really driving. That wide receiver rooms are basically identical. The Eagles are stronger at the top two, but the Green Bay has much better depth. Green Bay has a significantly higher graded running back room. And that's without, Jacobs playing back to 2022 levels. If he played back at 22 levels, that would add another 10 points onto the weighted average for the team. Mm-hmm. And so then that alone would put Green Bay in the lead for the offense. And then they have the tight end was not a huge difference there. Now, if you look at the quarterbacks, and I looked at a lot of metrics for quarterbacks, I always do. They have Hurts ahead of, so this is for year long, Hurts ahead of Love in PFF grade and completion percentage over expected, but Love ahead of Hurts in passer rating, ESPN's QBR, and EPA per play. Now, that's for the Love's whole season. If you want to look, as we've talked about, Love's last 10 games of the year where he went on a tear, he would be way ahead of Hurts in all 5 of these metrics. So that gives a little context to the slight edge that the Eagles have statistically in both offense and defense. Special teams, that's another.
There's a reason level. They extended their kicker this offseason. He's one of I would say he's in that top tier with Tucker, the Chiefs kicker. I'm forgetting his name right now. Tucker, Butker, and Elliott, I would say, are like the top 3, and they're in their own tier, in my opinion, amongst kickers.
Yeah. So last year, the Eagles were first in special teams DVOA and 5th by PFF's grading of special teams, while Green Bay was 31st by DVOA and 28th by PFF.
Yeah, it's been bad. It's been worse, but it's been bad.
Yes, because we've been not only 32nd, but like an ocean worse than the second
32nd and like 3 more standard deviations down from like the worst team. Yeah, the second worst team. It has been worse. But it's still not good. But yeah, so pretty much, I think by the roster, most people would probably say the Eagles are slightly better. But that's pretty much what's been going on with the Eagles. A lot of new additions, a lot of moving parts going on with Philly, especially a couple legends retiring from the team, a lot of free agents brought in, a few free agents lost. And, on paper, when you sum all that up, they're probably like you said, a little bit better on offense, a little bit better on defense, but we'll see in this game, won't we? But anyway, Dad, speaking of which, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this game, though, and of this game preview. And let's start with just some general thoughts in the game, and starting with your favorite section, Hey Now, Play Nice, where we say just one thing
still
nice.
Think I can't play nice.
Where we
I'm
say
not mellowing. You still think I'm mellowing? Huh?
It is easier when it is not the division, is all I'm going to say. But let's just say one thing that we think that is just
it's
objectively
like talking trash to your siblings.
Yeah, is just objectively good about the other team. I will go first since you've been talking for a little bit. Their talent on the offensive side of the football is just undeniable. You look at it in terms of just 11 starters. You got Jalen Hurts, you got A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Saquon Barkley, and Dallas Goedert in terms of skill players. You got Jordan Mailata, Lane Johnson, and Landon Dickerson on the line. And then looking at that just in terms of, average annual value, and these numbers are per over the cap, that adds up to, they have the 8th highest paid quarterback, the 4th highest paid running back, the 3rd and 11th highest paid wide receivers, the 4th highest paid tight end, the 5th highest paid left tackle, the highest paid left guard, and the 3rd highest paid right tackle. So 6 of their 11 offensive starters are in the top 5 highest paid at their position, and 8 are in the top 11. So 8 of their 11 starters are in the top 11 highest paid at their position. So murderer's row in terms of like skill level on their offense. Like only a couple spots where they aren't like heavily invested in. So that's my like first thing that I'm just going to say nice about them is the talent on their offensive side of the football is just undeniable. I mean, especially when you look at receiver duos in the NFL, I mean, maybe 1 or 2 are better than them, but they have an argument to at least be the best one. But yeah, so very talented offense. Dad, I think you had something similar too, right?
Yeah, so I was mainly focused on the offensive line, even despite the retirement of Jason Kelce to do podcasts and commercials.
I mean, did you see how much they're making off that podcast?
I have not.
They just several tens of millions of dollars they just sold that podcast for. So I think they're doing all right.
We're almost there.
Yeah, soon, definitely.
But last year as a unit, the offensive line was 7th in so by ESPN's grades, pass block win rate, and 1st in run block win rate. And their 2 tackles were 1st and 2nd for offensive tackles in the entire league in run block win rate.
Yep.
And their guard Landon Dickerson was first among interior offensive linemen in run block win rate. So they're holding like 3 of the 5 top 2 spots. 3 of their 5 offensive linemen are in the top 2 spots in run blocking.
Yeah, and also I sold the Kelsey brothers short. They sold their podcast for $100 million, so they're doing all right.
Yeah, $10 million. They would sell it for pennies like that.
Exactly. Yeah. No, they
have to hold out for more if that's the going rate.
They're making a good amount of money off that podcast. I think they're gonna be doing all right. But yeah, like you said, the offensive side of the football is really where their bread is buttered in terms of where they've invested the most amount of money. But they have investments in some other places, which is what we'll talk about next. But let's move on to our next section, Dad, where we talk about some things that we're maybe a little bit nervous about, some places where there are some specific things that the Eagles do well that the Packers might struggle with. And I'll go first here. The thing that I'm nervous about is our interior offensive line against their interior defensive line. Because I think we can all say our interior offensive line is, a little bit shaky, specifically at center and right guard. And I'm specifically talking about, Josh Myers and either Sean Ryan or Jordan Morgan, specifically versus Jalen Carter of the Eagles. That's the specific interior offensive line, defensive line matchup that I'm a little bit nervous about, because looking at the numbers last year per PFF, Jalen Carter was 12th amongst all interior defensive line in the league in pass rush productivity, which is a metric that is similar to pressure rate, but gives a little bit of a bonus for a sack. So it's essentially just like a little bit of a bonus for a sack, but otherwise is very similar to pressure rate. But he was 12th in the entire league, and he was a rookie last year. And he was tied with Kenny Clark in his pass rush productivity last year. So keep in mind that there's room for him to grow from there, which is a scary thought. He wasn't as good against the run. He was only 87th of 141 defensive tackles in stop rate. But PFF did think he was better than that. Even when he wasn't making plays on the ball, they had him actually 20th in PFF run grade. PFF run defense grade. Meanwhile, looking at how that compares to, who he'll be going against along the interior offensive line, Sean Ryan last year was 64th of 90 guards in pressure rate allowed and 68th of 90 in run blocking grade. So below average as a pass blocker and run blocker last year and his brief stints at right guard. Those are both per PFF as well. And then Josh Myers was 19th of 37 centers in pressure rate allowed and 33rd in run blocking grade. And so if it's either of them, I think there is a clear advantage for Carter. And then if it's Jordan Morgan at right guard, this will be his very first snaps in any NFL game of any kind. He did not play one snap in preseason. So that would be a very tough first task to ask of him is, go block the guy who, was one of the best defensive rookie interior defensive linemen we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years. And you got this. Go out there. But so that's something that I'm a little bit nervous about going into this game.
Yeah, and not surprising because their interior defensive line, even without Fletcher Cox, is looking really good this year. And
yeah, I mean, I'm specifically focused on
group.
I specifically focused on Jalen Carter, but Jordan Davis probably hasn't lived up to where they took him in the first round, but he's still like a solid player. And then Milton Williams is a nice rotational interior defensive lineman that they have, so they got some bodies they can rotate in there. Yeah,
both of them had PFF grades over 70 last year, so not bad. That's overall defense. But not elite like Carter, who was as a rookie was 87.4, one of the best in the league. But that's not the only thing to worry about.
No, it is not. So what are you nervous about in this matchup?
So our run defense against their run game on offense. As I mentioned, their elite run block win rate is matched up against Green Bay's not so elite run stop win rate. It was their 17th. They're also by DVOA, they're first in DVOA power success, so short yardage success. You might have heard of the tush push. Basically unstoppable.
But maybe not as unstoppable without Jason Kelce there. Thing.
Without Jason Kelce, risking getting his,
back. He said that he
severe
just
spinal injury.
Hated doing that play. I would be willing to wager that them spamming that play is part of the reason he retired, as young as he did.
You have to be low man, which means you have, I don't know how many thousands of pounds of humans on your back if you're low man on that pile.
Exactly. And so, there's questions on whether or not they'll be able to run that tush push. And, they've talked about a lot off season is that Kelsey handled all the protections for them last year in the past few years. And so that's all shifting to a combination of Cam Jurgens and Jalen Hurts, which with a new offense, I guess that is definitely something that is a bit of a question mark. But like you said, their run game is elite, and they've just, replaced DeAndre Swift, who I think is like a solid, like above average running back, with Saquon Barkley, who is, I think, he's much better than DeAndre Swift.
Yes. And Green Bay's like power success defense was 19th best. So it's another strength against weakness scenario if the Eagles can replicate their short yardage success from the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And there are other numbers about the
because you mentioned the run game. I specifically am a little nervous about the quarterback run game. Because last year, the Packers were third worst in the league in terms of rushing yards per game allowed to quarterbacks. And I was hoping to be able to surprise you with this one, but it turns out you had Googled it already. But listeners, if I told you that Jalen Hurts had 17 carries the last time the Packers played the Eagles in 2022, how many yards do you think he had? The answer is 157 rushing yards the last time these two teams played. I knew it was bad. I did not remember it being. I remember it being bad.
It's not quite Kaepernick level, but it's one of the worst regular season of all time.
I thought I would have guessed 90, like 98, and I was like, we got killed by him. We definitely gave up like 157 yards on the ground, and so that's something that I'm nervous about.
If people didn't calculate, that's 9.2 yards per carry.
Yeah,
so that's just the QB running. However, that wasn't the whole story, because I was also looking back at this game and what happened last time they played. In addition to the 157 yards and 9.2 per carry from Hurts, Miles Sanders ran for 143 yards at 6.8 per carry.
So that's
Barkley is generally
exactly
considered
at
to be a
300
better running back than Sanders.
They got to 300. So no,
just for those two. There were other runs as well.
Yeah, and so I'm worried about the QB run game. I'm worried about the run game overall. We're gonna see. This is a big test for Jeff Hafley defense week 1. It's going to be his first experience as a defensive play caller at the NFL level. So, I mean, let's stop the run, please.
Can we change what has been the Green Bay pattern for years now to struggle
against running quarterbacks? And specifically
against
running
the running game in general for several years now.
I remember, that I watched when they first hired Jeff Hafley, I watched an interview he did, and he was specifically talking about how, at the college level, defenses have to be different because you need to account for running quarterbacks more at the college level. And so I'm hoping that he takes some of the, lessons learned at the college level in terms of containing a running quarterback and goes back to that well and learns some of those lessons. But since we're talking about it, Dad, let's start being a little more optimistic here, because we've been on the negative side. We've gassed up the Eagles a little bit. We talked about some things that we're nervous about in terms of matchups. What are some exploitable weaknesses, though, that the Eagles have? Because like we mentioned last year, they fell apart down the stretch. So what caused that? What are some things that the Packers can, take advantage of? What are you looking for in this game? What are some exploitable weaknesses of the Eagles?
Yeah, so their defensive secondary was very shaky last year. But they have remade it by adding Isaiah Rodgers and drafting Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. They were 18th in covering the deep part of the field last year and second to last in covering the short part of the field. And they brought in Vic Fangio as new defensive coordinator. Well, Miami last year was 6th worst in defending the short part of the field. So and there's definitely weakness there. And their primary slot corners right now are listed as Quinion Mitchell, who only played like 5% of his career college snaps in the slot. And the other slot corner list is Cooper DeJean, who has struggled so far in coverage in the preseason.
Yeah, and he also missed a good chunk of camp with injury as well. So we'll see if he's ready to go week 1.
Right, so they are, I think, potentially vulnerable to short passes and the slot.
Yeah, and
despite the change in defensive coordinator and adding more cornerbacks to the room.
And that's kind of exactly what, I'm keeping an eye on is their defense, specifically their whole back seven. Like the linebacker room for them was a mess last year. They were trying to get Shaq Leonard off the street to come be their savior. That didn't really work. they're like you mentioned, they've completely remade they brought in Kevin Byard halfway through the year to try and save them. That didn't really work very well. They've completely remade their corner group and safety group by trying to bring back Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, drafting Cooper DeJean, drafting Quinyon Mitchell. Like, they realized that this was an issue, and this was a big issue for them last year. I don't think they've really fixed the linebacker room. So that's something that I think is an exploitable weakness. I think they are, I think we can probably take advantage of them in play action is all I'm saying. And then so you already touched on that though, so I'm not going to get too deep into it. The other thing that I think is an exploitable weakness of theirs is their interior offensive line with Kelsey leaving. So right now, per their depth chart, they are moving Cam Jurgens, who played right guard for them last year, to center. And he is more of a natural center in terms of when he was coming out in the draft. Apparently, like, this was the guy, they had Jason Kelsey watch, all the center's tape. And this was the guy that he was like, I think this guy can do what I do. But to ask him to replace a Hall of Famer week one, that's a lot to ask. And when you look at Jurgens at right guard last year, admittedly playing a position that he's probably not as suited for, he's only 300 pounds flat, like even. So he'd be small for a guard. But at right guard, he was 58th in pressure rate allowed last year of those previous 91. So he was marginally better than Sean Ryan, but he was not a plus level starter at right guard. And then they're also having Mekhi Becton play right guard now for where Jurgens was. So Jurgens moving to center, Mekhi Becton to right guard, who had previously only played tackle. And I mean, Mekhi Becton is huge, but I wonder, is he too big to play guard? Like, he's like dang near 360 pounds, like 6'7", like.
Right. Is he too tall to play guard?
So
I have a question up under his pads for a bull rush.
And I don't know. So he was 56th in pressure rate allowed of 73 tackles last year. So he was a below average tackle for the Jets last year. So they're trying to do some, dancing and moving around to some players. But I think that center right guard pairing is ripe for some, exploitation. And we'll talk about later, I think Kenny Clark is a real name to watch in this one, because I think that's something that he can. That's a matchup that he can, take advantage of there. But so those are the two exploitable weaknesses, like you said.
I would just say, I like the fact that their two weakest offensive linemen are next to each other.
Yes, so are ours, but that's fine.
Tomato.
Yeah, but anyway, who needs a center and a right guard? Us and the Eagles are both like center, right guard. Who cares? It's fine. But also, yeah, and so like you mentioned, their defensive back seven, their linebackers specifically. There's a reason they remade all of that. There's a reason they have a new defensive coordinator. And their interior offensive line, I think, are some major weaknesses. But Dad, moving on to our next section. How do you want the Packers to approach this game and either take advantage of those weaknesses or take advantage of other weaknesses? What are some things that you want to see the Packers do in terms of approach in this game?
Yeah, so this kind of follows on what I was looking at in terms of the coverage from the Eagles. I want to see the Packers use the tight ends a lot in the passing game. Last year, the Eagles were 28th in the league by DVOA in covering tight ends. And Miami, where Fangio was last year, was 30th. So it's not like he's
bringing in the secret
expect
sauce.
Him to fix that problem. Both Kraft and Musgrave, and to a lesser extent Ben Sims, can be used to exploit any weaknesses Philadelphia has in covering tight ends. Kraft last year was 5th in the league in yards after catch per reception at 7 yards, and Musgrave was 14th. And Musgrave was 7th in the league in passer rating when targeted, and Kraft was 11th. For tight ends, that is.
Yeah, hopefully Kraft will be ready to go.
I'm hoping,
because I think it's a big deal if he can play.
I'm very excited about what Kraft can do this year. I don't want him to miss time.
Yeah. For me, the main thing, like my main takeaway from doing this research is I really hope Jeff Hafley is the type of defensive coordinator who will change what he's doing depending on the team he's playing against. And I think we'll know if he is that type of defensive coordinator if he comes out in the first half and blitzes Jalen Hurts relentlessly. We've seen throughout Jalen Hurts' career, going back to even his first playoff start from like 3 years ago now against Tampa, Todd Bowles just came out and said, "We're going to blitz you every single time, and we're going to see what happens." And they totally fell apart. The Eagles did, and even last year when they played Tampa in the playoffs is something similar. And obviously, Hurts has made some improvements there. But even if you look at his 2023 stats, these are from pro.nfl.com, shout out, that's an awesome new resource that NFL put out. But so even if you look at when he was pressured last year, Jalen Hurts ranked 6th in the league amongst quarterbacks in EPA per dropback when pressured. And I like EPA per dropback because it includes scrambles. So it includes the fact that he's a major threat to run with his legs. But so keep that in mind. 6th in EPA per pressure in the league when dropback. EPA per dropback when pressured, rather. He dropped all the way down to 19th in EPA per dropback when blitzed last year. So it's not just a matter of, when they blitzed, they were getting pressure on him. No, when he's getting that quick pressure in his face from places that he doesn't know where it's coming from, that has been an issue for him. And I think that issue will only be accentuated by the fact that they don't have Jason Kelce calling out these protections. And so it's going to be the first time Jalen Hurts is calling protections, the first time Cam Jurgens is calling protections, with a thing that he has not been successful against before. And so I think if you're Jeff Hafley, you have to make him prove he has made strides in that area before you do anything else. If you blitz the first half of the game and he just lights you on fire, okay, make adjustments going into the second half. But I think if you're the Packers defense and if you're Jeff Hafley calling your first game, you need to be willing to take some big risks there, call some blitzes on third downs and second downs, and make him prove that he's made those improvements.
Yeah, and they've got guys who can blitz from different angles. I think corner blitzes, safety blitzes, like guys who've done it in college, who they've added would be like Evan Williams.
Evan Williams should be a good blitzer. Javon Bullard should be a good blitzer.
Cooper, if he can.
Keyshawn Nixon should be a good blitzer. I mean, they have players who should be good at this.
Yeah, and so at multiple positions, so those blitzes can come from a lot of different angles, which I think is maybe what the data is capturing here and why there's a difference between blitzing and pressures.
Yeah, it's that quick pressure from an unexpected area and the fact that they don't have their usual protection caller. I think this is a game where you have to open up the game by throwing extra bodies on the pass rush. I mean, we see just by the numbers, he's way worse when he's blitzed. But anything else that you hope the Packers, do in terms of approaching this game, or should we move on to some of our players to watch?
Let's see. Let's move on to players to watch.
Okay, who are you keeping your eye on? Don't take your eye off that guy, one of our favorite sections. Who are you keeping your eye on specifically? So this is either a player that we think is going to have a great game or a player who, how they play will swing the outcome of the game. It's like, if this player has a great game, the Packers are going to win, and if this player, does not perform up to that standard, the Packers are going to have a really tough time winning the game.
Yeah, so I've got some on offense and defense, and I don't know if you have the same. Maybe you do. But I'm looking on offense at Jaden Reed and, Tucker Kraft so short area or from the slot to find open space against the Eagles defense in the short passing game. And the fact that the Eagles have a lot of inexperience covering receivers out of the slot. So I think this could be a big game for Jaden Reed.
Yeah. And I wonder how much they bring CJ Gardner-Johnson down into the slot if Tucker Kraft is there, because he's probably the person who matches up best on tight ends of their defensive players. But I don't think they would have him come down on Jaden Reed at all. So I think that's a good point there is anyone who can catch the ball in the short intermediate area and make something happen with the ball in their hands. I would even add Dontavian Wicks into that conversation. But I think all three of them are really good choices. I just think
Reed is going to be getting more chances.
Yeah.
Fair. This game. And so he'll have a bigger impact on the game.
Yeah. For me, the first player that came to my mind was Kenny Clark. Like we talked about previously, their center and right guard are major question marks for Philly. They could be good. They could be bad. We'll see. Jeff Stoutland, obviously their offensive line coach. I wouldn't say obviously. Their offensive line coach, Jeff Stoutland, is very well known for developing offensive linemen, for getting the most out of his offensive linemen. So it's always the possibility that Mekhi Becton looks way better with the Eagles than he did with the Jets. Obviously, there's the possibility that Cam Jurgens moving from right guard to center, he turns into a very good center. He's still a young player as well. But Kenny Clark is Kenny Clark. Like, I think that he could be primed for a massive game in this one. And not just him. I mean, I could have picked Devontae Wyatt. I could have picked Carl Brooks. I could have picked a few other players as well. But Kenny's, the best player along that defensive line. And I think especially with the fact that Jurgens is a lighter center, he's only 300 pounds. I mean, we've seen before what Kenny has been able to do to Garrett Bradbury. And I think that could be a really good matchup for the Packers. And so Kenny's someone I think that if he has a great game, he could be really impactful in this one.
Yeah, I think this, and the whole philosophy for the defensive line to penetrate and go upfield for those defensive tackles, for Kenny and Wyatt and Brooks and Wooden, I think they're all going to get some time. I'll just be trying to shoot gaps and chase the quarterback.
Exactly.
But did you see what Preston said about
Hurts?
He
just reused an old quote, though.
He did. He said that.
He said that about Russell Wilson like 4 years ago. Yeah, he said the fastest chicken in the yard with no fence.
In the backyard with no fence.
He had said about Russell Wilson back in 2021, 2020. Can't remember what year it was they played the Seahawks.
I've seen that before.
Yeah, well, it would have been 2020, I think.
but still,
yeah,
he is maybe one of the better running quarterbacks. You don't want to lose containment and have that chicken run around loose.
No, they need to be able to get him down because, like we said last time, I mean, it couldn't be worse than 157 yards, right? Like it couldn't be worse, right?
Packers have given up worse.
Yeah, I mean they were kind of in that game at the end still. Like it was like 40-33.
Yeah, so that was also the game where
Jordan Love
first
not
showed
his debut, but
debut.
Not really his debut, but
no, but first showed he could do it.
Yeah, that's true. But anyway, Dan, any other players you're keeping your eye on in this game?
So on defense, I'm going to keep an eye on as much as I can with the, can't watch the all 22 live, but Xavier McKinney, I think is going to make the entire defense better this year by
that's the goal.
The back end clean and on task and being assignment sure. And I'm going to be very interesting to see how they use the safety room as a whole, but they're rotating forward and back, disguising the scheme, the play call. But I think McKinney is just going to be so much better than any safety we've had for a long time.
That's why they brought him in. That's why they, paid him a hefty chunk of change to come from New York to Green Bay. And I'm really excited to see his debut in this defense. I think he could be a really fun player to watch. And keep in mind, he has experience, getting picks off of Jalen Hurts. Like he used to play Jalen Hurts twice a year, every single year.
Yeah.
So he got some experience with that Eagles offense. The other player that I wanted to touch on was Josh Jacobs, someone I'm keeping my eye on in this game. And not necessarily, I know the spirit of this, exercise is like players who could really like have an outsized impact depending on how they play. I'm looking at him in this game more for going forward. Because like we talked about, the running back room is really thin right now, with both, Lloyd and Wilson, kind of dealing with, different ailments right now. We don't really know the severity yet, but dealing with different ailments with A.J. Dillon out for the year. We're at the point where we might need Josh Jacobs to return to his 2022 form. We've talked ad nauseum about how last year in 2023 was not his best year, kind of came into the week one, after holding out maybe a little bit out of shape, was, near the bottom of the league in most efficiency metrics, whether that's, rushing yards over expectation, et cetera, et cetera. I'm also curious to see how he's used, though. So I'm curious to see how he looks for, because I think if he has a really poor game, it's going to be like, okay, is our run game cooked? Like, are we going to be able to run the ball at all this year? I'm also curious to see how he used, though. We've talked, previously about how Matt LaFleur prefers, a bit of a pretty split backfield. I think the largest split he ever had in his time in Green Bay is 60-40. And it's usually closer to 50-50. My question is that the split he wants? And he's going to do that no matter who's out there? Or is that a artifact of the fact that Aaron Jones was only 193 pounds and was a bit smaller and he was trying to save him? So I'm curious to see the usage as well with Josh Jacobs and see how he looks, because I think it's going to be a big sign of how the ceiling that this offense could, and also the floor that, we saw last year when they couldn't run the ball at all for the first 6 weeks. It was like, oh, great, another 3rd and 8. Oh, great, another 3rd and 10. Oh, great, another 3rd and 9. And it was just like the passing offense, and Jordan Love had to just bail this offense out over and over and over again. And so I don't want to get back to there.
Yeah, the other thing about Jacobs' usage is he's going to be more involved in the passing game than he was in Las Vegas.
He's never caught a touchdown before.
He's
never caught one before.
Will he catch his first receiving touchdown in this game?
I think they're going to try and get him it. I think if it's first and goal at the 4, the first 2 plays are going to be trying to get him that receiving touchdown. I would put money on it.
First 2 plays.
I think they would try back-to-back plays. Let's try and get him that receiving touchdown, knock the lid off this thing.
Yeah, but he's, they showed more in college in receiving than they've tried him.
Yeah,
on the Raiders.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I think he can give the Packers more. So
which is so surprising because Derek Carr is such a check down artist. He loves to check down, and I know he checks down more now with the Saints than he did with the Raiders, but he still likes to check down.
He went through a stretch where he checked down a little less his last couple of years in Vegas.
Yeah, I guess.
But so that's going to be very interesting, especially I think people who want a bell cow back in Green Bay, it may be by necessity.
Yeah,
for this week anyway.
Yeah, there might not be any other options. We'll probably see a little bit of Merriweather, assuming either of Lloyd or Wilson. Right now they're just limited, so there's a very good chance they're still going to be available. But Lloyd, I think, is less likely than Wilson, given the fact that Lloyd missed so much camp, right?
Yeah, he didn't get much chance to even practice for the last couple of weeks. So he's probably a little bit behind schedule.
Yeah. But at least he wasn't had to put on IR.
Wilson was looking good.
Yeah. I mean, back-to-back preseason rushing yard leader. That's the Emmanuel Wilson to you. But we're getting a little long on time, so let's go to our final section, which is overtime, where we just bring up anything that didn't fit into one of our tidy little boxes that we wanted to talk about. Dad, I have 3 things for you, and I'm going to let you pick one. The 3 things that I didn't get a chance to talk about that I wanted to were, what is Jeff Hafley's defense? The second is, how are the rookies deployed? And the third is, how does Eric Stokes look? Which of the 3 would you like to talk about?
I like how you're highlighting them so I don't miss them as you say them.
Yeah, it's just a force of habit.
But I would go for how are the rookies deployed?
Okay, so this is my question. How are the rookies deployed? First off, let's just go pick by pick. I'll just run through my thoughts. Right guard, I'm thinking we're going to get a rotation between Ryan and Morgan based on, Matt LaFleur alluding to that, based on the fact that they did that with Runyon and Ryan last year, and based on the fact that they did that with Elton Jenkins and Lane Taylor when it was Elton's rookie year. So I'm imagining there's going to be a rotation there, but how much? Is it going to be 50-50? If Morgan struggles at first, is he just going to get the hook? If Ryan struggles, is he just going to get the hook? How does Morgan look at right guard? We haven't seen him in any game reps yet, so that's something. Obviously, it seems like, Javon Bullard is going to be the starting safety next to Xavier McKinney based on everything we've seen in camp. But how do they deploy Evan Williams? Does he get, snaps and dime? How many snaps does he get? I'm guessing somewhere in 10 to 15. Is he going to be used as a blitzer? Is he going to be used to go to the slot? I don't know. Will Edgerrin Cooper, he missed most of camp, so he's not going to be the starting linebacker maybe that we all hoped, or at least not early in the season. Is he going to be brought on for specific packages where he's just asked to blitz or just asked to spy? Something that's like a very easy assignment that's just like, hey, you need to do one thing on this play, just use your athletic gifts and chase Jalen Hurts down. I think he could still be very effective there. Does Tyron Hopper get any plays of specific packages? Does Marshawn Lloyd, is he the running back 2 or the running back 3? Or does he just get a couple, design touches? And just down the line, like those are the main ones that I'm looking at. But how do you see it deployed? Because those are kind of how I'm seeing it.
So I think you're right. I think we'll not see that much of Morgan in this first game. But my opinion is that it's going to gradually ramp up until he takes over. He had already essentially won the starting right guard job.
Yep.
Until he got hurt.
I will say, though, as a noted Sean Ryan doubter myself, I thought he looked pretty good in these preseason games. And obviously it's just preseason, but he looked pretty good.
This is the best he's looked, yes. So give him some props for definitely looks improved this year.
You want to hear my hot take?
But the coach's own opinion showed that they preferred Morgan.
That's true. My hot take on Sean Ryan, you want to hear it?
Let's hear it.
If he plays well this year, if he doesn't completely melt down.
I know where this is going.
He is the starting center next year.
Yep. Because he did a lot of center reps before Morgan got hurt.
Yeah.
He was getting more and more center reps while Morgan was playing right guard. And that could definitely happen.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, I think we're going to see a 50-50 Morgan-Ryan split. I actually think
in week 1.
I think we're going to see a 50-50 split unless Morgan just has a really terrible first or second series.
Okay, I guess we'll see. Maybe split in terms of series possessions.
I think drive to drive. I think each drive we're going to see a new one.
And for Cooper,
you can tie Cooper and Hopper in together. I don't think either's going to play very much, but I could see some packages for Cooper.
Yeah, they've kind of stuck since training camp began with the same starting linebacker group of Walker, McDuffie, and Wilson, which was kind of a surprise after how the rave reviews were of Cooper in the spring.
I do maintain though that if Cooper had been able to practice in training camp in full, he would have gotten that job from Wilson. I think McDuffie and Walker were kind of cemented, and that kind of showed in the fact that they were both not active for either the second or third preseason game, and I think Wilson was for the second one at least.
I think Wilson played a fair amount in one of those games too. That's why he still got out there.
But so I think Cooper could have passed Wilson, but given the fact he missed all of camp, it just wasn't going to happen now.
Yeah. I think Cooper will have that job before the season's over. One of the starting 3.
I would hope so, especially spending a top 50 pick on him. But
yeah,
we'll see.
And then as for Evan Williams, things get a little murkier about how often do they have 3 safeties out there, or do they get him out there by putting Bullard in the slot?
I would like that. I would like that very much, but we'll see. I would like to see, Andy Herman has talked about this, a rotation, a slot like by, play type, where it's like
or opponent type.
Yeah, where it's just like
Keyshawn's like a big slot or a twitchy slot.
Yeah, and other people have said this. Keyshawn's probably your best all around slot. Bullard probably helps you a little bit more in the run game, still bigger. And then maybe putting Jair in there in obvious passing downs. There's something like that where you're not just statically like, oh, you're the slot for the whole game. Just like having some variety to how you play it. Also, make the offense guess a little bit. Don't just tell them exactly what's going to happen every single time.
Right, because they may be able with personnel to rotate the
and even McKinney
the
has
positioning
been
of players in pre-snap.
Yeah, and even McKinney's been good in the slot when asked to do that. He's a very versatile safety, so he can do that as well. But yeah, so I do think the rookies is definitely something that I'm keeping my eye on as well. I just wanted to touch on the Stokes thing though. The last time we saw Eric Stokes play, he was not very good. So how does he look in this new scheme that's probably better fit for him? In terms of, more press, more man coverage. He was really bad in zone last year. Really, really bad. Really tough year for him last year. I know he was dealing with injuries, but it was tough for him. It was like 158 passer rating.
He wasn't ready. It was a problem. Yeah, then they brought him back first on special teams, and he got re-aggravated the injury.
Yeah, but
it was just kind of a lost
I'm
year.
just thinking back to those Carolina and Tampa games. Like, it was really tough for him. And he really hasn't played almost in 2 years. So How is he going to look out there? I don't know.
He hasn't missed a single practice yet.
Knock on wood.
So
yeah,
he's not showing any sign of being easily injured.
Knock on wood again. But we're going to see if he still has, if that player that was there his rookie year and that first round pick is still there. I mean, he's had a good camp, all things reported, but that's just something I'm keeping my eye on. But Dad, we've talked enough about my overtime things. What are your last things that you want to touch on before we wrap it up here?
So what impact will the new kickoff rule have? The results in the preseason were mostly kind of uninspiring, but it'd be very interesting to see if Nixon has more long returns this year. Will you see it in just a one-game sample? Probably not, but it'd be nice. It'd be fun.
Have you seen did you see the thing that, I think it's Michael Lopez, who does data analysis for the NFL, tweeted, where it was by preseason week, the rate of touchbacks went up by like 10% each preseason week. Because the average return was out to about the 28.7 yard line. And so touchbacks just the 30. And so everyone was just like, okay, we'll give that extra 1.3 yards with no risk associated with it. And that's fine with us.
So the chance of
his point was, I think we're going to see a lot of touchbacks on this still, even though
they still
it's
haven't
going
gotten
to the 30.
Rid of the touchbacks because the way they're lined up, you get almost gifted some yards, and you don't have to break through that many people to
take it away.
Get to open field.
And also, the original version of this rule in the XFL was the 35-yard line, was the touchback.
I think that makes more sense where there's a little more punitive.
So because the difference in a 7-yard difference is a big difference. A 1 yard difference, you could be like, okay, it's worth giving up a yard to have no risk there.
Right. Yeah. So that would be kind of disappointing if that is the way this goes. It will have totally failed its purpose if that happens.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll see if it sticks. But no, I do think that is something to keep an eye on because the Packers' special teams, like we talked about, has been bad. So will they improve?
Maybe their
Who knows?
Hit coverage will be better this year because
we'll see. We'll see. Yeah, just kick. I mean, we didn't kick for touchbacks back when you were supposed to. Remember, Rich Bisaccia said, we don't want kicking. We don't want to kick touchbacks. We want them to return it. And everyone was like, that doesn't make any sense. And he was like, we want returns. Like, okay. I mean, so if we wouldn't do that when it was going to the 25, there's no way we're kicking touchbacks when it goes to the 30, no matter what the math says. So
it's nice not to have math involved for football decisions.
Yeah, everything's easier when you don't look at the numbers, right? But anyway, anything else you wanted to touch on in overtime, or should we wrap things up?
For this particular game, it's how bad is the Eagles locker room?
Yeah,
it'd be nice to find out.
Yeah, I know. If we can make them tilt a little bit, that would be good.
Last year, over the last 7 games, including the playoffs, they were 17th in the league in EPA per play on offense and 31st on defense. And their only win was against the Giants. And by splitting with the Giants, they had to have two chances.
They had 2 chances, took one of them. So it's not great.
We were 0 for 1, but
it's because Tommy Cutlets, it's just too good.
So if they get frustrated early, maybe the wheels will come off again. That'd be kind of sweet.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see it. But let's start wrapping things up here, Dad. Bottom line, the Eagles win if blank.
For me, I have if the Packers pass blocking can't hold up to the Eagles rush, then I think we're going to be in deep trouble.
Yeah, I agree. I have the Eagles win if the Packers can't figure out the Eagles run game. If we have another scenario where they're running for 300 yards, I don't think anything else even matters. If you get 300 yards put up on you on the ground, I don't think anything else matters. It's like you're not going to win that game. Packers win if blank, Dad.
They can just hold the league. This is flip side of yours. They can just hold the Eagles to a league average rushing yards per game or less, which is like 113. Last year in their wins, the Eagles had 146 yards on the ground per game, and in their losses, only 96.
That feels like a chicken or egg thing. That feels like they're winning, so they're running the ball. They're losing, so they're not running the ball.
I didn't say what was the chicken and egg in my prediction.
Fair enough. Mine is the Packers win if the Packers can run the ball and not get stuck in too many third and longs. Because, like you mentioned, if they get stuck in a lot of third and longs, that's going to be the opportunity for the Eagles pass rush to tee off. When you're in a lot of third and longs, you're just not running, you're just hoping for some high variance shot plays. And that was something that really killed the Packers early in the season last year, was they were stuck in a ton of like 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 10.
Yeah. And, the numbers from last year kind of fit with that. In the last 7 games where they went on the losing streak, they gave up 46 yards more rushing per game than in their 10-1 start.
I still think that might be a chicken and egg thing, but let's just hope the Packers can move the ball on the ground a little bit and that Josh Jacobs looks, like his 2022 self. Dad, final bit, score prediction. What do you got?
I think this is going to be kind of a messy first game of the year game where the offenses are not going to be that crisp. And so I have the Packers winning 21-13.
Okay,
not a high scoring affair, but they slug it out.
I think it's gonna be
not super ugly either. I could have gone like 13-10 or something.
The NFL's not gonna let that happen in a big marquee Friday night game. They're gonna
what are they gonna do?
Pump those numbers up. The refs are gonna start catching the ball for the players. They're just gonna start popping it up into the air. Yep. Oh,
DPI.
Exactly.
They're gonna be like
someone's got to move
DPIs.
The ball. Exactly. What's the move call? I think it's Ron Torbert on the
call. Put it
at
to 1.
I got a Packers 31, Eagles 24. I think it's going to be a little more high scoring. I don't think the Eagles defense is magically fixed. I don't think the Packers defense is magically fixed. I think it's going to take time for both of these units to gel and to settle in, and we'll see if they do. But I do think the Packers can outscore the Eagles. So I got them winning 31-24. Hopefully opening up the season 1-0, and hopefully we'll be happy in our post game. But Dad, we'll be doing a post game for this game. So everyone check that out. We'll be trying to probably record that. I would guess probably Monday of next week, but we'll keep an eye on that. We'll keep you posted. And we'll keep you posted on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out whenever we have new episodes out. We tweet out the research we do for these episodes if we find some interesting numbers that we think, bear repeating. And we tweet out, injury updates, roster moves, coaching moves, et cetera, other pieces of Packers content that we enjoy, one-stop shopping for everything Titletown. And then, if you like what you hear here today, come subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. So that's, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. Hopefully we're back on YouTube soon. Still trying to figure that out. Please bear with us. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. Dad, any last things you wanted to throw in there as we get ready for week 1 of the NFL season?
I also want to see this be looking like a Packer home game, which is by itself will give it a 6-point swing. Based on the home field advantage formula.
If you are down in Brazil for some reason, be as loud as you can. The Packers need it, but not when the Packers are on offense. Only when the Packers are on defense. But anyway, thank you again so much for listening. So excited to have football back. Check out the Father Son Packers podcast when we do our recap for this game. Hopefully after a Packers win. And until next time, go Pack, go.
Go Pack, go.